Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an ambush Pepperjack stream on a Friday. Still is Friday, isn't it? I believe it is. Hope you're all doing well. Yes, I got inspired to riff for a little while on the drama that is the open game license and Dungeons & Dragons. Just last week, I think it was. Wasn't it just last week? I did a stream on Dungeons & Dragons wherein an article accused Gary Gygax of being a race essentialist and turning everything of the olden Dungeons & Dragons basically evil, and how the gaming community was both not inclusive but also inclusive at the same time. Very interesting timing for that to come out ahead of this grand controversy. So, not being a Dungeons & Dragons historian, for those of you that don't have any idea what any of this is, I can't give you an absolute and total retrospective on the events that have occurred in the last couple of weeks specifically. But I have at least a loose understanding of what has happened in the past. So that's what I'm going to attempt to go over now, just for informational purposes and also just to, I don't know, have something to do while I'm reasonably inebriated. I've got a Pepperjack in me. At least one, maybe 1.5. So we'll see how much I can maintain my vocabulary as we proceed. Thank you, Derek LaRue, once again. From stream to stream, I do not know what to say other than thank you so much for your support and your generosity. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's not really a matter of doing this because of generosity or anything, but Derek LaRue, you are you're now a mod, just to keep an eye on things since you're here so much and you've been so supportive. Thank you so much. Wrenches are not for sale, everyone, but I do appreciate people who show up on a regular basis and contribute positively, even if donations aren't part of it. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much, Derek. As my words slur as the alcohol slowly takes effect. So, what is the open game license? What does that have to do with Dungeons & Dragons? Why is this such a big controversy amongst the nerddom right now? Well, I'm going to read a little bit about the history of the open game license, and that'll give you some context as to what has just recently occurred and why so many people are up in arms over this in the nerdery community. The Open Game License is a public copyright license by Wizards of the Coast that may be used by tabletop role-playing game developers to grant permission to modify, copy, and redistribute some of the content designed for their games, notably game mechanics. However, they must share alike copies and derivative works. All right, so I'll get into the details in a second, but in simple terms, in layman's terms, back in 2000, I think it was 2000 specifically, and they might say so otherwise in this summary, the people that owned Dungeons & Dragons and published it, Wizards of the Coast, they effectively said, hey, gaming is for everyone, and we want to expand the community. We want to expand engagement by our customers and our fan base, and so we're going to make the mechanics that make up our game available to people to use to make their own content. It's sort of like saying, hey, I'm TEDx, and even though we're a private company, we're going to license our branding and things to people who want to put up their own shows, so long as they fall within certain requirements. They can put the TEDx branding on there and be part of the TEDx network. Kind of like that, to put it very simply. But the other thing was that people could make content that they could then sell for their own profit. Independent publishers could make use of the mechanics of the Dungeons & Dragons game and make their own games and own publications. So, for example, let's say that you wanted to create your very own unique race of beings in the Dungeons & Dragons universe that didn't currently exist in Dungeons & Dragons. So let's say you wanted to create a race of characters that people could play based off of aardvarks. You wanted to make an aardvark race. And so you use the Dungeons and Dragons template of rules to create an aardvark race with different stats and different abilities and such that was unique to your creation, but still related back to the Dungeons and Dragons system and technically the lore. You could then produce this into a PDF, let's say a 5-page PDF, that you could then sell online, say at Drive-Thru RPG for like 99 cents. You know, and so you can make a little money off of this. And as long as you gave attribution back to Wizards of the Coast, as long as you gave enough credit to the people who created the thing, you could make your own thing and conceivably sell it for yourself, for the fans, for the community, or just give it away, whatever you wanted to do. That was the idea of the open game license, to try to give back to the community and allow people around the community to create things that contribute to the overall Dungeons and Dragons universe, or, you know, derivative games thereof, as long as you gave a certain level of credit. That's the simple. Let's go into more details. The OGL states that, quote, in consideration for agreeing to use this license, the contributors grant you a perpetual, worldwide, and the perpetual, let's remember that word for a second, perpetual, worldwide, royalty-free, non-exclusive license with the exact terms of this license to use the open game content. The OGL defines two forms of content: open game content, the game mechanic, and includes the methods, procedures, processes, and routines to the extent such content does not embody the product identity and is an enhancement over the prior art, and any additional content clearly identified as open game content by the contributor, and means any work covered by this license, including translations and derivative works under copyright law, but specifically excludes product identity. I think, and, you know, give me a little bit of rope here to work with because I'm not a lawyer, you can't say that you are a Dungeons and Dragons publisher, or you're an employee thereof, or, you know, you work for the company, I think. Product identity and product line names, logos, and identifying marks, including trade dress, artifacts, creatures, characters, stories, storylines, plots, thematic elements, dialogue, incidents, language, artwork, symbols, designs, depictions, likenesses, formats, poses, concepts, themes and graphic, photographic, and other visual or audio representations, names and descriptions of characters, spells, enchantments, personalities, teams, personas, likenesses, and special abilities, places, locations, environments, creatures, equipment, magical or supernatural abilities or effects, logos, symbols, or graphic designs, and any other trademark or registered trademark. Use of another company's product identity is considered breach of the licensing agreement. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but there you go for reference. So here you go. Here's where it all started. Third edition. This is the third edition printing of the Dungeons & Dragons core materials. The OGL version 1.0A was originally published by Wizards of the Coast in 2000 to license the use of portions of the third edition of Dungeons & Dragons via a System Reference Document, or SRD, thus allowing third-party publishers to produce compatible material. This move was spearheaded by Ryan Dancy. Publishers could also use the separate D20 system trademark license to include a logo indicating compatibility. In an interview, Dancy said, quote, I think there's a very, very strong business case that can be made for the idea of embracing the ideas at the heart of the open source movement and finding a place for them in gaming. One of my fundamental arguments is that by pursuing the open gaming concept, Wizards can establish a clear policy on what it will and will not allow people to do with its copyrighted materials. Just that alone should spur a huge surge in independent content creation that will feed into the D&D network. So basically, it's like if we open up the gates to people making their own content that falls within certain guidelines, they add to the community. They add to the overall network of products and the fan base. And ultimately, you're going to have to come back to Wizards of the Coast for the core materials and supplementary materials that are created by people. You know, it gives back to the community. It increases loyalty and the fandom and interest in the overall products. Kind of the thing. It's kind of like the what am I trying to say with the Pepperjack starting to hit me. The idealism. That's what I'm looking for. The idealism of gaming as a community building, open, free-flowing idea farm between people, nerds, geeks, etc. That was kind of the thing. Academics Benoit Demille and Xavier Lecoq, in the economic journal Revue d'Economie Industrielle, highlighted that a business goal of the OGL was to have competitors institutionalize a standard rule system. Quote, if WotC could get more people in the industry to use the same system, players would learn only one system and be able to migrate from product to product and game to game without learning and transaction costs. While it would reduce the number of original gaming systems in the market, the idea was to increase the audience for everybody, especially for the leader. The ultimate goal was to establish D20 as a recognizable trademark like VHS or DVD. Yeah, for all the goodwill it was still a business strategy. I mean, Wizards of the Coast was still a business. If they could be the father of gaming with the mechanics that everybody understood, their products would still remain a hallmark. In 2004, Wizards of the Coast addressed what would occur if the license was changed. The OGL, quote, already defines what will happen to content that has been previously distributed under an earlier version, in Section 9. As a result, even if Wizards made a change you disagreed with, you could continue to use an earlier, acceptable version at your option. In other words, there's no reason for Wizards to ever make a change that the community of people using the open gaming license would object to because the community would just ignore the change anyway, unquote. Let's keep that one in mind, shall we? Oh boy, 4th edition. In June 2008, Wizards of the Coast transitioned to a new, more restrictive royalty-free license called the Game System License, or GSL, which is available for third-party developers to publish products compatible with Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. The GSL is incompatible with the previous OGL. However, by its own terms, the OGL is irrevocable and remains in widespread use. Greg Tito for The Escapist in 2011 commented that the GSL, quote, released in conjunction with 4th edition took away many of the freedoms that the industry had come to expect with the D&D rules, such as reprinting text for clarity in new products. Andy Collins, a Dungeons & Dragons designer who became the design and development manager around the release of 4th edition, stated that, quote, I remember arguing pretty hard to retain something like what Wizards had done for 3rd edition, an open license that included the core rules and a few basic guidelines on how to use it. I argued that without some kind of OGL, Wizards risked leaving behind the body of customers and potential customers who saw the open license as an assumed part of the D&D. The D&D? Okay. In hindsight, I wonder if it might simply have been better to let the OGL die rather than guilting the company into crafting a Frankenstein's monster of an open license that ended up pleasing basically nobody, unquote. Onward, 5th edition. On January 12th, 2016, Wizards of the Coast released the 5th edition SRD under 1.0A of the OGL, marking a return to the open gaming format. Additionally, content creators can access an additional license option by publishing through the Dungeon Masters Guild storefront. This license goes a step further by allowing individuals and third-party publishers to create and sell content based on specific Wizards of the Coast intellectual property, such as the Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, Eberron, and the Magic the Gathering Planes. Content creators are allowed to set their own price. However, Wizards of the Coast and One Bookshelf take a 50% cut of the proceeds. So basically, you could create your own content and you could sell it as long as you gave a cut back to the Wizards of the Coast. And Hasbro. You see, Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast and has done so for many years. All right, let's move on. What happened next? 1D&D. In August 2022, Wizards of the Coast launched a public playtest of the next version of the Dungeons & Dragons under the 1D&D initiative. In November 2022, there was reported speculation that the Open Gaming license would be discontinued for this new iteration of Dungeons & Dragons based on unconfirmed leaks. In response to the speculation, Wizards of the Coast stated in November 2022, quote, We will continue to support the thousands of creators making third-party D&D content with the release of One D&D in 2024. While it is certain our open gaming license will continue to evolve, just as it has since its inception, we're too early in development of One D&D to give more specifics on the OGL or system reference document at this time, unquote. Following concerns raised by third-party Dungeons & Dragons creators on the potential changes to the OGL in December 2022, Wizards of the Coast released additional details on the upcoming OGL 1.1, which would go into effect in 2023. This new license will clarify that it only applies to, quote, printed media or static electronic files, like EPUBs and PDFs, and, quote, only covers material created for use in or as TTRPGs. OGL 1.1 will not cover other content, such as video games or virtual tabletops. Content creators using OGL 1.1 will be required, quote, to put an official OGL badge on their products. Revenue related to OGL content must be reported to Wizards of the Coast if that revenue exceeds $50,000 annually. Creators who make at least $750,000 in income annually will be required to pay a royalty starting in 2024. Linda Codega for IO9 in January 2023 reported on the details from a leaked copy of the OGL 1.1, including updated terms such as no longer authorizing use of the OGL 1.0. Okay, so let's back up a second here. Remember the irrevocable perpetual language in the original open gaming license? Yeah. They were, and perhaps still are, we'll get to that in a second, getting ready to basically say no. Anything created under the original gaming license no longer counts. Those rules no longer apply. We're going to just revoke all of that after the fact, after declaring otherwise for the last 20 years. Codega explained that while the original open gaming license granted a, quote, perpetual, worldwide, non-exclusive license, unquote, it also included language around authorized versions of the license. Quote, according to attorneys consulted for this article, the new language may indicate that Wizards of the Coast is rendering any future use of the original OGL void, and that asserting that if anyone wants to continue to use open game content of any kind, they will need to abide by the terms of the updated OGL, which is a far more restrictive agreement than the original OGL, unquote. The document also states that the intention of the OGL was not, quote, to fund major competitors, and it wasn't intended to allow people to make D&D apps, videos, or anything other than printed or printable materials for use while gaming, unquote. In a statement to EN World, Dancy, former VP of Wizards of the Coast, and the architect of the OGL 1.0 said, quote, my public opinion is that Hasbro does not have the power to deauthorize a version of the OGL. If that had been a power that we wanted to reserve for Hasbro, we would have enumerated it in the license. I am on record numerous places in email and blogs and interviews saying that the license could never be revoked, unquote. Okay, so let me break this down a little bit. And again, there are other sources for this, people who are far more involved in this than I am, but I have a working understanding of this. Basically, what happened was in the course of the open gaming license, where they allowed other people to publish works and derivatives and so on using the Dungeons and Dragons mechanics, something happened. Something happened that probably the big corporates didn't expect to have happen. Another game was created that ended up trumping D&D's market share for several years. And that's a game called Pathfinder. Now, you may or may not be aware of Pathfinder, but Pathfinder is similar to D&D in that it is a high fantasy tabletop role-playing game. But its first edition, and many of its rule sets and some of its, settings and things, were inspired by or taken directly from the open gaming license rule set from Dungeons and Dragons. And Pathfinder and the company behind it, ISO, for a time there, and arguably still, have produced far better products and far more popular products than the Dungeons and Dragons brand over the last several years. And so effectively, by opening up their mechanics and some elements of their settings, Hasbro / Wizards of the Coast created the opportunity for competitors to exist. And Pathfinder, as a single game line, certainly became that. It almost completely usurped Dungeons and Dragons for the most part. Hasn't completely overtaken it because D&D is classic, but all the same. But anyway, so recently, Hasbro, obviously, got a little testy about allowing other entities to profit off of their intellectual material. It's kind of like regretting the past actions of other people, opening up the floodgates to creativity and content creation and so on. Also, Hasbro has a lot of money invested in the D&D brand being very popular. They have a movie coming out in the next several months starring Chris Pine, a Dungeons and Dragons movie. I think the first one since the early 2000s. They also have a D&D series on the way. I think it was from Amazon. It's either Amazon or one of the big streaming services. So they have a vested interest in retaining the D&D IP, franchise, and attention to their brand. And then this copy of their revised OGL shows up. And amongst other things, as described in this Wikipedia article, the one thing that probably ticked off people more than anything else is, under the revised open gaming license, if you create anything using the Dungeons and Dragons system or elements thereof, Hasbro / Wizards of the Coast own your content and can reprint it and resell it at their leisure, and they don't owe you a thing. So if I spend a month creating a 5-page PDF of a brand new race for Dungeons and Dragons based around aardvarks, and I put my heart and my soul into this, and I put it out there, and I register it with them as I'm supposed to under the rules, they can say, great, thank you for contributing to the Dungeons and Dragons community. We're going to include this in an anthology of other works created by other people and sell it for ourselves. Thank you for contributing. You don't get anything for it, but thank you. Now, a lot of people over the last 20 years have built either side levels of revenue for themselves or entire careers around publishing content using the open game license. And what D&D and Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro was attempting to do with this leaked draft of the open gaming license revision was to basically say, nah, we owned you. All your base belonged to us. So that leaked about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, onto the internet. And the notion is, what I've heard at least, is that this was a draft of the open gaming license sent out to several other businesses who are associated with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro for D&D as a sort of like test document. Like, here's what's upcoming, just to let you know what things are going to look like so you can prepare for it. There's evidence for that from certain statements made by Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is a place where a lot of open gaming license projects have gotten their funding from. And so there's a rumor, and I can't confirm it one way or the other, but I've heard elsewise, that this document was sent to them, and then Kickstarter released a statement that corroborated what was in the leaked draft of the document, which isn't necessarily a draft anymore. It might have been the final version that they were just sending out as a heads up to certain corporate entities involved in the thing. But either way, that version, whether it was a draft or otherwise, of the OGL 1.1 got leaked to sites like IO9 and elsewise. And as soon as the community found out, it was absolute bedlam. Everybody and their brother involved in D&D for years, independent publishers, content creators, live role play organizations, absolutely lost their collective, I'll keep it family friendly, lost their collective minds over it, and justifiably so in some cases. Now, there is this thing that Dungeons and Dragons has set up in the last several years called D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond is an online network that you can sign up to and create an account for and have a subscription for. And basically, this allows you and other Dungeons and Dragons fans to play Dungeons and Dragons games online through a network and do like live streams and electronic tabletop games and register your character sheets and all types of stuff. A network with other people, join games. It's like one big VR chat, right? Except for Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a paid subscription. They make money from this. Well, D&D Beyond has had such a glut of unsubscribers in the last week and a half that their site crashed for a while, and it might still be doing so. I even heard that they hid the button where you can manage your account for a while to try to avoid people tracking their subscriptions. People are running away from D&D in droves over this because it is seen as a big middle finger to the fan base, to the community. It is a sign of absolute and total corporate greed. And the goodwill towards D&D as a product, Hasbro as a company, Wizards of the Coast as a publisher, is completely in the toilet at this point. It has gotten to the point where several publishers have gotten together and say, we're not going to use any version of the OGL anymore. All of our products ongoing are going to avoid it. And in fact, we're going to get together, create our own gaming system that we will then effectively donate to the public in perpetuity to a nonprofit that anybody can use and never has to fear having their creations or imaginations or anything else captured by a corporate entity again. There is a big, huge battle taking place amongst the D&D and tabletop role-playing communities right now, which is just, I can't recall seeing anything like it before. It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, thank you, John Miller. I don't know who to blame harder, Hasbro or former Microsoft CEO heads Wizards. It's a combination. It's a combination of people who are more concerned about their market share, their profitability, etc. Which, I mean, capitalism, shareholders aside, that's fine. But no, they have shot themselves in the foot entirely on this. Because by doing this, they have unified and basically poked the sleeping giant. The sleeping giant of the collective of gamers, publishers, nerds out there who were happy just playing games, making content for Dungeons and Dragons and contributing it to the community. But now Hasbro and the others have decided that no. You're not a community. You're effectively unpaid freelance contractors, amongst other things. We're going to restrict the ability of people to have fun and make games and play with each other and create content that they're interested in and other people can share. And I forget who it was, but I watched a video where somebody said, Hasbro picked the exact wrong demographic of people to do this to, because they were referring to effectively as gamers for the last, however many decades. What do we usually do? We gather together a ragtag band of underdogs to face off against some overwhelming, impenetrable enemy. And Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast have turned themselves into the dragon and now must be defeated by the ragtag group. And that's what's happening right now. So in the near future, Paizo, the company that created Pathfinder, the most successful D&D sort of derivative OGL product, and who have, over the course of their editions of publications, moved away, for the most part, from those original open game license rules and things, to the point where now they're effectively their own thing, but they remember where they came from, and they remember the community that they were serving to begin with. They're organizing a whole bunch of companies to create and to even go to court, if necessary, a independent open gaming license for a system and mechanics for games that anybody can use. But thank you, Keldrake. In the wake of this news, I've heard a lot of people singing "A Pirate's Life" for me. Well, here's the thing. If you're not publishing content, if you're not trying to make a profit off of it, you sit down with a bunch of friends at a pulled-out table in your kitchen on some night, you can play whatever game you want. As long as you're not trying to make a profit off of it, you don't have any legal entanglements to deal with. But the interesting thing is going to be what comes out of this. But thank you, Keldrick, so much. But here's what happens. So Dungeons & Dragons, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, they had been promising an update on the open gaming license for the last 2 weeks. But they hadn't provided it. They kept pushing it off because the sudden outpouring of outrage from people after this leak occurred caused them to keep pushing it off and pushing it off. What were they going to say? Was the leaked copy of the document the official document? What was going to be their response? Well, just today, a few hours ago, they released it. And I'm going to read it to you now, just so everybody has an idea of what's going on. At least this is the official word from the D&D Beyond staff, but effectively from D&D and Wizards and Hasbro. An update on the Open Game License OGL. When we initially conceived of revising the OGL, it was with 3 major goals in mind. First, we wanted the ability to prevent the use of D&D content from being included in hateful and discriminatory products. Yes, remember everyone, we're really looking out for everybody's sensibilities. You don't want anybody making D&D that has, I don't know, orcs as an inherently evil race, because obviously that's racist. Anyway, second, we wanted to address those attempting to use D&D in Web3, blockchain games, and NFTs by making clear that OGL content is limited to tabletop role-playing content like campaigns, modules, and supplements. I thought that was basically already covered in the original OGL because it never mentioned, and of course they didn't exist at the time, blockchain, NFTs, and so on. And third, we wanted to ensure that the OGL is for the content creator, the home brewer, the aspiring designer, our players, and the community, not major corporations to use for their own commercial and promotional purpose. We don't want to build our own competition. I mean, there is some sense to that. But unfortunately, the cat was already out of the bag, guys. In the spirit of community and collaboration, that cat was out of the bag years ago. Driving these goals were 2 simple principles. Number 1, our job is to be good stewards of the game. Then explain 4th edition. For those D&D nerds in the audience, explain 4th edition. And 2, the OGL exists for the benefit of the fans. Nothing about those principles has wavered for a second, except for the part where the draft version of the document said that anybody who creates anything under any OGL previously, you now own their content. Thank you, Fun Time Bats. Sorry I'm late. Also, hi Scribe. Hi Bats. You're having a good Friday. That was why our early draft of the new OGL included the provisions they did. That draft language. See, they're having to scramble at this point. There is nothing to indicate that the version of the OGL they sent out to other publishers prior to the official release was anything other than a final copy. Nothing. Because Kickstarter's announcement regarding what they had to do in regards to the upcoming OGL was exactly the same as in the draft of the OGL. So there's some indication, very good indication, that the draft wasn't a draft. It was the final copy. And now they're walking it back and saying it was a draft, guys. It was just an experimental document. It was just to put the feelers out. That draft language was provided to content creators and publishers so their feedback could be considered before anything was finalized. Okay, then why did Kickstarter make an announcement affirming what they were going to have to do to change their policies to align with the upcoming revision to the OGL? If it wasn't a final draft, why would they make such an announcement? In addition to language allowing us to address discriminatory and hateful conduct and clarifying what types of products the OGL covers, our draft included royalty language designed to apply to large corporations attempting to use OGL content. It was never our intent to impact the vast majority of the community. You mean except for the language that said that basically anything anyone creates, regardless of how much profit they made off of it, effectively became property you could then take and republish. I mean, the royalty thing aside, the original draft, the draft that went out to everybody else, the final copy, said in no uncertain terms, if you make anything using the OGL or any previous versions of the OGL, it becomes D&D's property to republish as they see fit. Okay. However, it's clear from the reaction that we rolled a 1. And for those of you not in the gaming scene, if you roll a 1 on a dice with 20 sides on it, it is an automatic failure. That is the slang there. It has become clear that it is no longer possible to fully achieve all 3 goals while still staying true to our principles. So here's what we're doing. No. It's no longer possible to fully achieve the lockdown on everybody else's work and content based on the fact that it got leaked before you were ready to make the official announcement. You got caught red-handed trying to screw everybody over who's been operating under an understanding of collaboration and community for the better part of 2 decades and more. That's what happened. The next OGL will contain the provisions that allow us to protect and cultivate the inclusive environment we are trying to build and specify that it covers only content for tabletop RPGs. Yes, because the majority of D&D players now are totally racist, exclusionary, and just intolerant jerkwads. I'm not saying that those kind of people aren't out there. I'm not saying that the woke infection of diversity, equity, and inclusion hasn't found its way into the D&D community over the years, but it doesn't represent the majority. But if that's what you're trying to prevent, I think you're aiming at the wrong targets. Anyway, that means that other expressions such as educational and charitable campaigns, live streams, cosplay, virtual tabletop uses, etc., will remain unaffected by any OGL update. Content already released under 1.0a will also remain unaffected. Which means that anything that was published at the time, so in a way, this is better than the first version, because at least the implication here is, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so someone double check me on this, that if you publish something under the original open gaming license, your publication date protects you from the implications of the upcoming revised OGL, because anything published after the date that the revised OGL goes into effect, that becomes liable. So anything in the library of the old open gaming license supposedly is still safe. Won't end up being affected by the new OGL. That's the implication here. What it will not contain is any royalty structure, and also will not include the license back provision that some people were afraid was a means for us to steal work. Yeah, okay, you're removing that, because that was in the version that went out to people. You got caught with your pants down. That thought never crossed our minds. Taking other people's content and publishing for our own use without giving anybody any payment for it, no, that never crossed our minds. Never crossed our mind. It wasn't in that version that went out to publications previously. No. Under any new OGL, you will own the content you create. We won't. Any language we put down will be crystal clear and unequivocal on that point. The license-back language was intended to protect us and our partners from creators who incorrectly allege that we steal their work simply because of coincidental similarities. What? As we continue to invest in the game that we love and move forward with partnerships in film, television, and digital games, that risk is simply too great to ignore. The new OGL will contain provisions to address that risk, but we will do it without a license back and without suggesting we have rights to the content you create. Your ideas and imagination are what makes this game special, and that belongs to you. A couple of last thoughts. First, we won't be able to release the new OGL today because we need to make sure we get it right. Yeah, aside from the version you sent out to all the publishers and other organizations such as Kickstarter as a final draft that they could then craft their own policies around, which Kickstarter did and made an announcement to that effect. You guys are scrambling behind this. You've seen the negative backlash over this that you could have possibly predicted. Make sure we get it right, but it is coming. Second, you're going to hear people say that they won, and we lost because making your voices heard forced us to change our plans. Those people will only be half right. They won, and so did we. Okay, if ever there was a statement of cognitive dissonance in corporate doublespeak, here it is. All right, let me read that again. Second, you're going to hear people say that they won and we lost because making your voices heard forced us to change our plans. Those people will only be half right. They won, and so did we. You got caught with your pants down, and you imagine that people were just going to roll over on this. And they're not, and they wouldn't have otherwise. All you did was show an enormous amount of corporate greed and disrespect for the fan base that has fueled your business for decades. Sharing, collaboration, community, partnership, all of these things are now gone. You have destroyed them. You couldn't build off of the fan base. You couldn't take advantage of the goodwill that you've ginned up over the last 20 years with the OGL and the partnerships created thereof, and even work alongside those publications that have been successful as a result. Pathfinder and Paizo owes everything to the OGL. They wouldn't exist. You could work hand in hand with them, but no, they're a competitor. They're an enemy. We have to lock that down. We can't let anybody make content that we don't approve of. Our plan was always to solicit the input of our community before any update to the OGL. Oh, when did you do that? When did you do that prior to this outrage? When did you do that prior to the leak? When was that? Okay. The drafts you've seen were attempting to do just that. No. The drafts we saw were leaked against your desires. The draft we saw wasn't a draft. It was the final version. Again, you're not even addressing the Kickstarter announcement that affirmed that what was sent out was the final draft. That's why they were changing their policies on Kickstarters using Dungeons & Dragons property stuff. We realized we did not do that this time, and we are sorry for that. Sorry, wait, I missed a sentence. Apologies. The drafts you've seen were attempting to do just that. We want to always delight fans and create experiences together that everyone loves. We realized we did not do that this time. Well, then what happened to always solicit the input from your community before any update to the OGL? You didn't do it this time? And we are sorry for that. Our goal was to get exactly the type of feedback on which provisions worked and which did not. No, it wasn't. You'd already decided. You didn't ask for any feedback. This all had to come about because of a leak. You made no official announcement of here's a draft copy of OGL 1.1. It was leaked to a media outlet. Our goal was to get exactly the type of feedback on which provisions worked and which did not, which we ultimately got from you. Yeah, only because you got caught with your pants down, not because you solicited it. Any change this major could only have been done well if we were willing to take that feedback, no matter how it was provided. So we are. Thank you for caring enough to let us know what works and what doesn't, what you need and what scares you. Without knowing that, we can't do our part to make the new OGL match our principles. Do you have any at this point? Finally, we'd appreciate the chance to make this right. What's there to make right? You didn't do anything wrong. Everything was part of procedure, right? What are you apologizing for? You made no mistakes. This was all part of the plan, says the Joker. We love D&D's devoted players. No, you don't. No, you don't. You were willing to ambush them with this without any warning and lock down anybody's efforts, either past, present, or future, for your own gain. We love D&D's devoted players and creators who take them on so many incredible adventures. We won't let you down. Well, I hate to tell you this, D&D, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, the damage is done. It has been done. And I think, John Miller, we backed off so we can try it again later. Yeah, exactly. We got scared off. They won, but so did we. Absolute poppycock. So essentially, what happened was Hasbro decided to make a power move, and instead they united multiple outlets and countless players, fans, and content creators against them. People are unsubscribing from Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, which is their online service, paid online service, in droves. People are making public declarations that they're not going to buy any more D&D content. They're going to move over to other games. They're going to start using other systems. Publishers that have anything to do with the mechanic of the Dungeons & Dragons brand from the past OGLs and otherwise are swearing to move on to different systems and to detach themselves entirely from Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, and D&D. It has become a movement. A justified movement of retaliation against stupidity. Stupid corporate greed that did not need to happen. And they did all of this. They vilified Gary Gygax in an article just the other week. I did a stream on it. Gary Gygax was a race essentialist, talking about fictional races, and that somehow makes him a racist. I mean, admittedly, I don't know Gary Gygax's heart, but let's say for argument's sake that he was, in real life, some kind of racist. It has got nothing to do with D&D has become over the last 30, 40 years. But they made a point of trying to vilify him and his name and everything else, as though, yeah, we have to set aside the old Dungeons & Dragons. The old Dungeons & Dragons is tainted. It's evil. It allows itself to be opened up to non-diversity, non-inclusion, non-equity. You know, those old Dungeons & Dragons rules where orcs were evil and elves were all this, that, and the other, where different races had different attributes to them because they were different creatures with different physicalities. No, we can't have that. That talks about race essentialism. We have to make everything a bland, common gruel that everybody can eat and nobody can get offended by. Orcs can't be an evil race anymore because obviously orcs refer to a real life Earth race. And by saying that, I'm totally not being a racist in and of myself. Yeah. So think of it this way. Open Gaming License 1.1 was meaning to be, and may still, meaning to be the last of the Jedi or the Dungeons & Dragons property. They were meaning to take this and reset, do away with the past D&D and set the new, better, cleaner, more appropriate, more corporate appropriate D&D. That's what this was attempting to do. And they have hit a wall as a result. And it's beautiful to see. I love seeing stuff like this. I love seeing people who get themselves so worked up into such positions of authority and perfection, and we know what's right, etc. And then they do something like this, and they completely shoot themselves in the foot. So as a consequence of this, as I said, Paizo, the company that makes Pathfinder, Green Ronin Productions, who does a whole bunch of other D&D associated and type content and things derivative thereof, Kobold Publishing, a whole bunch of longtime gaming publications and publishers are working together now, have band together as a ragtag group of unlikely heroes to oppose the giant dragon that is Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, D&D, and create their own open gaming content that people can use in perpetuity through a nonprofit and can never be owned by anybody other than the people who create the content around it. Now, that project is called the Open Role-Playing something or other. Anyway, its acronym is ORC, funnily enough, ORC. I'm looking forward to seeing if that pans out. There's a whole bunch of other legal hurdles and things that are going to come about as a result of this. And it'll be interesting to watch as a fan of gaming and gamers for a better part of my life. I mean, I bought, and I still have, role-playing books I've never played a game out of just because I like the lore in them. I owned a copy of Vampire the Masquerade 3rd Edition for at least 6 or 7 years before I ever played a game, just because I loved the lore they presented, the version of reality where vampires existed. And once I finally did play a game of it, man, I was already a armchair expert in the setting. So I was good to go. Admittedly, I've only played, I could probably count on my one hand how many actual Dungeons & Dragons campaigns I've played. But that aside, I have an appreciation for tabletop gaming and the nerds who love that kind of stuff of telling stories, improvisational acting, being a game master or a DM or a storyteller, and getting people together to run an adventure, have some fun, and just the freedom of that. And also the connectivity. I met people in the course of role-playing that I never would have met otherwise. Our lives in so many ways diverged that, save for this one shared interest, I never would have come across them. And I forged relationships and friendships and even romances with people that, save for this one shared interest, never would have happened. I mean, you want to talk about diversity and inclusion. I've never experienced a more diverse and inclusive community than the gaming community. It's always been there. The one thing that article I read last week about Dungeons & Dragons that it said was true is actually true. It has always been an inclusive community because the kinds of people who are interested in this stuff originally, back in the olden days, we were the people who were marginalized. We were the nerds and the geeks, the shy ones who were interested in things other than sports. We like telling stories, we like playing pretend and reading books and video games and so on, and imagining other worlds outside of this one. It was the original inclusive community because we didn't have a whole lot of friends. And when we found people who shared our interests, oftentimes, most times, it didn't matter what they looked like. It didn't matter what else they were doing. If you like doing this stuff, we were desperate for people to join in and to join with on these activities. So when I see something like this, and then I see how people from around the gaming communities, different publications, different games, people who even don't agree with each other politically, all rally around the idea that Dungeons & Dragons took one step far too far this time and are banding together to create something that's going to be, conceivably, far more inclusive and open than even the original open gaming license. I like to see that. That makes me happy. And so I have a tenuous idea and intent. If and when this open role-playing consortium thing, whatever, certificate, ORC project becomes available, I have a tenuous idea that I'm going to take this rule set, these mechanics, and I'm going to create my own game, my own moon-based game. It's Crater Valley, and it's going to have character sheets, and it's going to have profiles of Scribelight and Ranting Monkey and Satsu Two Cents and all the Lords of the Night, and it'll have Sir Adamantine's House of Celestial Sins. It'll be a setting for role-playing game, and it'll have rules and lore and all this other stuff. And I'm going to put it out there free. You know, I'll work on it. I'll create it. I'll create a first edition, whatever the heck you want to call it. and I'll start putting it out there for free because I don't care. I'll by the time this thing becomes available, if it becomes available, I'm going to make a project out of it, and I'm just going to start making it. And at some point, I'll run a game of it with some people, and yeah, that's my intent. Will it happen? Fingers crossed. I hope so. If I can get some of my other YouTube Lords of the Night friends to approve of using their names and or likenesses in it, and again, won't be a profitable thing. It'll just be something put out there for people that are interested. That's what I intend to do. So and the entire intention behind it is to have some fun and do something I've never done before, is create my own game and setting. But 2, also as a big middle finger and schadenfreude celebration against D&D, Hasbro, and Wizards of the Coast for going too far afield on their attempts to take advantage of gamers. I tell you what, you don't want to take advantage of gamers. They've been training mentally and rhetorically their entire lives to battle the big beast. So there you go. All right. A few comments from you guys, then I'll wrap things up. John Miller, Iron Age. Yes, the Iron Age of creativity, publication, writing, gaming, etc. Razor Fist is a big proponent of this. Christopher Moonlight, who I've been on several streams with, has been a big proponent of this idea. If you don't know about the Iron Age movement in media and creatives, look it up. I'm not sure if it'll catch on or not, but I understand the meaning behind it, and I appreciate it. Let's see. Derek LaRue, yes, do it, Scry. Well, I intend to, but I got to wait and see until those rule documents come out. And then I got to start. I played role-playing games for years and years and years. I have made custom rules and powers and things for different games over the years, some of which got kind of published. I won't tell you what or where because that might dox me. So I'm not much of a math guy. I'm not a rules lawyer. I'm much more of a story guy. But if somebody gives me the mechanics, I can probably build something around it. So that's something I'm thinking about doing. Let's see. Peter Watsy slaps creators across the face. Creators, I can't believe you've done this. Yeah, more or less, if you can believe it. I mean, it was always a tenuous thing, but they definitely, like I said, they poked the bear on this one. John Miller, this makes me think of the South Park episode where BP Oil said, sorry, and just kept fucking up. Yeah. The statement from D&D today on the open game, their update, their delayed update, is so transparently BS. It's amazing. It's amazing, and it really goes to show that D&D is not run by gamers anymore. Truthfully, that's probably not been the case for several years, but there are certain instances where you know for a fact that you've got something that's been put through the corporate machine. And they have, within a very short amount of time, within a week, they have alienated the vast majority of their player base, and the vast majority of their player base is going to be encouraging anybody that comes to them looking to get interested in role-playing games to lead them away from D&D. D&D is going to become pariah territory. Already has, but more so in the coming weeks. And I'm not quite sure that D&D and Hasbro can recover at this point, because any open gaming license they release in the future can't be trusted. If they're willing to now or in the future completely roll back on the promises made to the content creators and gamers of the past, they'll certainly do it again. And so what Paizo and the other publishers are doing by promising that they're going to make a gaming license and a set of mechanics available to everybody through a nonprofit that doesn't have any risk of ever being interceded upon, that's going to trump anything D&D could ever promise to do in the future. Everything that's happening right now to Dungeons and Dragons, Hasbro, and Wizards of the Coast is a self-inflicted wound, and any schadenfreude is completely deserved. There's schadenfreude that's not deserved, having joy over somebody else's misfortunes. If it's something that happens not as a result of their own actions, lightning strikes their house and burns it down and so on, Yeah, but if you decide to make an action, this reminds me of the a little bit of YouTube lore from several years ago. You guys remember the Fine Brothers? The Fine Brothers on YouTube attempting to copyright the concept of React so that they could own a piece of any React video that was ever made thereafter. Yeah, you want to see a similar instantaneous downfall in your reach exceeding your grasp? Yeah, that reminds me of this. Let's see. Sarah, I don't play, but I'm a lore whore 100%. Yeah, like I say, I fell in love with Vampire the Masquerade because I liked vampires. I was into horror stuff, and the world they presented just completely intrigued and enthralled me. And yeah, when you have a role-playing game book or supplement that you can read absent the rules as though it were a novel, you know you've got something that somebody cares about. An example I'd give for anybody who's interested, the Conan line of games and supplements from Modiphius. They just recently lost the license to Conan, but the books that they published up to that point, it is, I've said this before, it is like having a reference library for the works of Robert E. Howard as pertains to the Conan the Barbarian universe. If you take all the mechanics out of it, if you just stripped out all the character building stuff and everything else and just looked at it as a reference library for information on the world established by Robert E. Howard for Hyboria, it might as well be your own personal library of information. It's great. And when I see things like that, when I can read entire chapters of a gaming book that don't contain any mechanics, but just tell you the background of this group or this history on the world or whatever, and feel like I've actually read a short story or a novel, I don't need to play the game inherently. Maybe I want to, but I just like having that book. I just like having that little extra piece of imagination fuel, you know? So anyway, but with that, everybody, I'm going to call it here. Just a afternoon, random, slightly Pepperjack fueled stream to talk about peripherally a subject that I'm very much in love with, that's tabletop role-playing games. And on the side, also the drama going on behind the scenes in the corporate world behind Dungeons and Dragons. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this unplanned stream. Hope you found something useful in it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, if you would, if you feel like it, on the way out, hit the like button. Or if you didn't like what you saw, please hit the dislike button, because I at least appreciate the fact that you stuck around long enough to hear it. And as a programming note, Sunday, per usual, I'll be doing the Sunday stream, if you can believe it, at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on this channel, where I'll talk about a thing. It won't be Dungeons and Dragons, because I just did that now, but it'll be something. I usually decide what that'll be, usually Saturday evening. There you go. Stick around for that. And of course, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, you can find me here for another edition of TED Excellence, where I'll look at another off-brand TED Talk for entertainment and misery. I call it Misertainment. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved. You have very little to do. Everybody who donated, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Everyone, have a good rest of your Friday. I hope you have a good weekend. If you have a 3-day weekend because of the holiday here in America, I hope you have a good time with your day off. Otherwise, everyone, I hope you are safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon. I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.